E3 might be gone, but Summer Game Fest carries on the spirit of the annual game showcase. We got to play a ton of games at this year's show, and these are our favorites from Summer Game Fest 2025. Bandai Namco is throwing its hat in the ring of Hades likes with Towa and the Guardians of the Sacred Tree. Though it has a lot of the same basic principles of Hades in terms of you're entering a room, there's a bunch of bad guys, you take them out, there is a reward, and then there are usually two different doors to take, and those will give you different rewards. I think the core gameplay loop is a little bit of a fun wrinkle on that Hades approach. So what you actually have is you pick a different character, and that character then also gets kind of a partner character, and those will influence both your general combat abilities and then your special abilities, your skills, your spells, so to speak, based on who you have as your partner character, and you're mix and matching those. You're finding different ways to crowd control, to deal high damage to the stronger enemies. And then at the same time, you have two offensive weapons that drain their energy. Think of it kind of like reloading. So you can't just use one of your swords forever. You actually have to switch to the other sword or a different weapon and let that first weapon recharge, is the best way to describe it. So you're mixing and matching, you're finding different ways to throw in a spell, throw in an ability. You have these kind of cool, flashier ultimates, and it becomes this really chaotic dance of trying to avoid damage. It still ultimately reminded me of Hades, but I do think that Bandai has figured out a way to deliver a few unique wrinkles on that Hades approach. And I thought what I played of Towa and the Guardians of the Sacred Tree was compelling enough. I got to one of the first bosses and I just barely died. So I definitely wanted to see what the persistent gameplay stuff is, and I didn't get to see any of that. What the progression is if you do fail, but the loop, the going from room to room, was satisfying enough to leave me intrigued. And I think Towa and the Guardians of the Sacred Tree is going to be one of those games that the Hades fans are going to want to give at least a introductory try and see what unique mechanics Bandai Namco is bringing to the table. I found it compelling enough to come away impressed with what I played. Sonic Racing CrossWorlds has two major things going for it. Obviously, there is the crossover potential. They have announced quite a few characters from outside of the Sonic universe, especially Minecraft. I think that's going to be a huge selling point for Sonic Racing CrossWorlds. That in and of itself is, I think, a big reason to be intrigued by the latest entry in the Sonic Racing franchise. It is still Sonic Racing. You are zooming around these really clever tracks. You're changing perspectives. You're switching your cart from a traditional cart to a boat. You're zipping around. And I think that is very fun, and I love any of the games that kind of delve into that Mario Kart-esque approach. What makes CrossWorlds unique is that at certain points during each race, you will be faced with this choice. If you're on the left or you're the right, you'll choose what this portal will open into. So you'll see, okay, I'm going to go into this level, or this is a mystery level, depending on which side you're on. And I think whoever's in first place dictates which cross world you go into. And so there's a lot of changing over. Think of it kind of like Ratchet and Clank, where you would portal into a new world. So that is crazy impressive. The tech that must be working behind the hood for that to be going is really impressive. Sonic Racing, it's just a great time. I can't wait to play this with my family. I love being able to pick fun, obscure Sonic characters. Just being Dr. Robotnik is super fun. Being Sonic and Tails and Knuckles is fun and appealing, and I'm sure my kid will love being able to pick those characters. But the new stuff that they're adding in, Minecraft tracks, I think that's gonna push this game over the edge for a lot of people. But I do think it's really tight in terms of the mechanics of driving and the car combat, the different offensive and defensive and kind of wild card items you can get, and how you can choose to use them to protect yourself, to get an advantage, to sneak your way into first place. That is also really well done. And then the CrossWorlds, I think, is the most impressive part of what they've done in terms of the design. Going from one track to another, mixing and matching through the portals. And in the final track of the Grand Prix, you're actually jumping through a bunch of portals, and I think that really pushes it to another level. Sonic Racing CrossWorlds, if you've been a fan of the Sonic Racing franchise, which I know there's a ton of people, that are really into that. Or if you just are sold on the appeal of mixing and matching characters from outside Sonic, I think you're going to be really impressed by what they've put together at Sega. And I think this is going to be another super fun one for the car combat genre. Shinobi Art of Vengeance is fast, furious, bloody, tons of fun. So this is a side-scrolling action combat platformer, carries on the spirit of the Shinobi franchise. It is beautiful to look at. I think this kind of almost hand-drawn art style, beautiful foreground elements, stunning background elements, that just draws you in. But the combat is fast, precise. I love that the way that the combat strings together combos and you can attack enemies. But what's very cool is that as you deplete this kind of stagger meter on each enemy, a kanji symbol will appear above their heads, and then you can do this kind of takedown move. So if you have multiple enemies on the screen with that kanji symbol, you can then do your finisher move and take out all of them essentially with just one press of the button. It is super flashy, super stylish, but then that also influences the health pickups you get. So you're trying to be deliberate about which enemies you attack, which enemies you keep in this weakened state. I had so much fun just mixing and matching the attacks, keeping myself in the air. There's a very satisfying air dash. It does have a little bit of that Metroidvania approach, even though the game itself, I think, is somewhat linear in how it goes about, but you can replay the levels, I think, with different abilities. The combat is really what sold me on Shinobi Art of Vengeance, being able to keep your combo meter going. It never depletes. As long as you don't get hit, your combo meter can keep going, and you can build out your character so that higher combos will lead to stronger attacks, variety in terms of which enemies you're facing, not just having to just attack and wail on them, but being deliberate with your dodges and your air dashes, avoiding their attacks. Again, keeping that kanji symbol ready to go and being able to finish them off. And then cool boss fights. I think the boss fights were really engaging. They required some precision, some dodging, and then getting your hits in where you could. It's everything you want out of a 2.5D action platformer. It has the style, it has the tight mechanics. I think the only thing that I was a little unsure of were there were some moments where if I didn't have my double jump and I did that finisher attack, I would end up stuck above a chasm and just fall. So I would love if after a certain point you got your double jump or your dash back, especially if you were putting yourself in a really precarious situation. But besides that, I had so much fun just slicing and dicing through enemies, trying to be as perfect as possible, keeping my combo as high as possible, zipping between them, doing those flashy moves, and then you get cool, more exciting abilities, and you can throw shurikens. It's got everything that you want out of a Shinobi game, and I had a ton of fun playing it. I think Shinobi Art of Vengeance scratches that 2.5D action platformer itch. It is perfect to me. Directive 8020 is the next game in the Dark Pictures anthology. It comes to us from Supermassive Games. I've been a huge fan of Supermassive Games since the very beginning with Until Dawn, but I have been so fond of the Dark Pictures anthology. The annual releases, starting with Man and Medan, have been something I've been looking forward to. And what's unique about Directive 8020 is that Supermassive actually took a little bit of a break. There was not an annual release in between The Devil in Me and Directive 8020, although there was a VR game in between there. So they've had some time to look at what fans do and don't like about the Dark Pictures, make some improvements, and I think it all shows in Directive 8020. This is Supermassive Games' thing or Aliens riff, so it's set in space. There is that paranoia about who is corrupted, who is actually themselves, similar to John Carpenter's The Thing. There is an alien creature that is able to replicate the various scientists or astronauts, space people on the spaceship and pretend to be them. And so it's up to you as the player to determine, are they themselves or are they an alien? Meanwhile, you're trying to avoid some of these alien encounters. I think what the Dark Pictures anthology does so well is creating these choices where you just don't know which one is the right one. Maybe there isn't a right one. Maybe they're both just really difficult choices. And so creating that paranoia similar to The Thing is really cool for Directive 8020. And then one of, I think, the biggest improvements for Directive 8020 is the way that it lets you see all of the branching paths from the choices you make. In the previous games, you could kind of see what choices you made once you finished the game or at certain points, but you can reverse at almost any point and see what this choice would have led you to. So it's great for trophy hunters, but it's also great for those people who just want to see all the different permutations that one choice can lead to and be able to see, okay, well, if I had believed this character was who they say they were and not an alien, where would the story have gone there? And maybe if you didn't like it an hour in and you wanted to go all the way back, you could. I think it's such a very smart system and an improvement that I think is going to go a long way, both towards the replayability of the game, but also in keeping people invested in seeing all of the cool things that Supermassive Games does with their storytelling and the way that they branch out the encounters and the progression of the story within Directive 8020. But even beyond all that, I just thought it was a really smart evolution of the things that you've seen in Man of Medan, Little Hope, House of Ashes, and The Devil in Me. It feels familiar. You are faced with this tense character moment where you're trying to avoid an alien and you're trying to sneak by. Then the director told me that if I had gotten caught at certain points, or also the characters that are in this sequence can be different based on what choices you had made previously. So the characters that I saw just happened to be those two characters for this demo, but they said it could be a different combination of characters depending on which choices you had made. It ratchets up the tension, and then you get to this character moment where you have to make a choice that is informed by your own personal feelings, but also maybe some things you've seen within the story. One of the characters, you think they might be an alien and you have to choose what to do with them and whether or not you make the right choice. I won't spoil, but I made a certain choice and it maybe wasn't the right choice, but I was faced with it and I felt like that was the correct choice in the moment. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was right, who knows? But I think Directive 8020, both allowing you to be able to see the different branching paths and also giving you this really cool sci-fi story that riffs on aliens and the Thing, is going to be a highlight of the Halloween spooky times for me. I love what Supermassive Games does, and I think that Directive 8020 is going to be another personal favorite for me, maybe even my favorite game. I like them all. They are near and dear to my heart, and I just really appreciate how they keep trying to pull from different horror genres or subgenres and doing unique things with them. And Directive 8020 continues that trend, at least for me. Infinitesimals is another game from Epic Game Publishing. This one developed by Qubit. And what's really cool about this game is that it uses the perspective of kind of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So you play a little alien creature that has landed maybe on Earth or an Earth-like planet. It's not really clear. It's not even clear what time period, whether you're in the past or the future, but there is sci-fi stuff going on. So you are this alien creature. It's a third-person shooter, very fast, very agile movement. You have this dash that's super satisfying to do. And you, in the demo, are trying to infiltrate this facility that has a few robotic enemies. So though it is that kind of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids perspective, everything looks massive, there's giant blades of grass, and there are bugs going around. They aren't really the enemies, or at least I didn't have to engage with them. Maybe you will have to engage with them later. I know in one of the trailers you see one of the giant bugs kind of rearing up to attack you, so maybe there will be that interplay, but most of the enemies I countered were these different types of robots. And so when you went into this facility, what was cool about that is the developers said that based on your playstyle, you could be more stealth focused or you could go in guns blazing, and you can build out your alien character to support that. So you can be a little more stealthy, stick to the vents and sneak around and do hacking and things like that, or you could just run in and shoot. I wanted to go in guns blazing because I love a good third-person shooter, and this was a really satisfying third-person shooter. The combination of the precision with the third-person aiming, the dash, and then later you get a jetpack where you can hover, and so you can hover and shoot and dash. Putting it all together, it was really, really satisfying. It is my type of third-person shooter. I think a third-person shooter with those fast, agile movement mechanics, despite the fact that it was a early demo, the game isn't planning to come out anytime soon. I think that the polish on there was strong enough to show me what it can offer once they've had more time to really fine-tune those mechanics, but I do think what was available during Summer Game Fest. It really excited me. I was actually very into the shooting. I didn't want to partake in the stealth, but it's cool to know that that is something that's available to you. And then the world felt really big, so you can scan and look around and target different points of interest and go off into the distance and find unique things to collect. For this demo, they wanted to keep us kind of on a specific path, but it is interesting to know that you can explore at your leisure. I think it's got some of that open world vibes going on, but really it was the combat that drew me in for Infinitesimals. The dash, the hover, the jetpack, all of that combined together with some really tight third-person gunplay had me going. And then the robots were uniquely designed, and having that art style of sci-fi alien Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is going to draw you in almost instantly. I think Infinitesimals is really, Epic Games is on a roll with the games that it had at Summer Game Fest, and Infinitesimals was another one that I was really impressed by. Next up is End of Abyss, which comes from Epic Games Publishing and developer Section 9. This is a Metroidvania, a twin-stick shooter. Isometric camera was most of what I saw during the gameplay hands-on portion, but it does have some side-scrolling and some unique camera perspectives, as you can see in the trailer. But what I played was mostly that isometric kind of top-down twin-stick view. What's cool about End of Abyss, beyond its art style, which looks a lot like Little Nightmares, that kind of claymation, spooky, cutesy, but also kind of gross and a little scary art style, is its ability to create this tension using your exploration of the environment. It is very cool in terms of its art style, but I think the mechanics of the twin stick shooting feel really tight. The monsters are really aggressive, and so you have to use a dodge sparingly. It's got a little bit of that timing based, you got to get out of the way. You've got to use your stronger weapons like your shotgun and your grenades a little sparingly and decide when is best to use them. And then there are plenty of enemies just popping out of nowhere and scaring you and getting you in this tense combat encounter. I really enjoyed what I played of it. I think that it feels mechanically very tight. It feels really polished. And I can't wait to see how those Metroidvania mechanics evolve, because all I really saw was being able to kind of go back around open doors and maybe hack or open doors using key cards. And so I'm curious if there are going to be new abilities or things like that. But just the shooting and being able to get in these close quarters gunfights and have to time your dodges, I'm a huge fan of the precision that comes with avoiding enemy attacks and being very deliberate with your shots and your use of your ammunition and weapon types. And I think End of Abyss has this really cool approach mixed with that art style that's really stark. It's got such a dark, almost shadow heavy use of art that I think what it brings to the table visually is very cool. And then the mechanics back that up. I had a great time playing End of Abyss. Out of Words might be the most ambitious game that I saw at Summer Game Fest. It was another title from Epic Games Publishing, and the ambition of this game. There are 3 things going on in this game that even if there was just one in this game, you would think, man, these developers are really pushing themselves. So first off, it has an art style that is all based in stop motion animation. So the developer told me that every single thing that you saw on the screen had been touched by a human hand, whether it was a blade of grass, a piece of hair. It all has that handcrafted stop motion animation. Every piece has been carefully and meticulously been manipulated by a developer approach. That in and of itself, crazy. Then you have the storytelling in the game, which is done without a lot of communication. The 2 main characters that you play, they have their mouths removed, so they cannot speak to each other. They cannot communicate their feelings or any of the emotions they're feeling. The story is kind of a love story, is what the developer told me. So being able to make this connection, form this bond between this boy and this girl character without them interacting through dialogue, that's crazy on a different level. And then finally, Out of Words is a co-op platformer where you are changing up the gameplay mechanics, and it is all set on one screen. Think of it like Hazelight's games, which are Split Fiction or It Takes Two. They were really inspired by that type of approach. So the game is fully playable with 2 characters on the screen. doing different mechanics, solving puzzles based on whatever the approach of that specific gameplay sequence is, that's a massive undertaking. So you have these three elements that you just feel like, man, these guys are really pushing the limits in terms of what they can do, especially with a game that doesn't come from an established developer and they don't have that huge backing in terms of a rabid fan base. This is the first game that I have ever seen from them, so being able to really push the levels of what you are doing with a video game impressed me beyond anything. On top of that, the game is super cool looking. That stop motion art style is fantastic. And then the mechanics themselves, the way that things change from moment to moment, we did a little jumping around, is so fantastic. It does remind me of Hazelight. I didn't get to see a ton of the storytelling stuff, so being able to figure out, okay, well, how is the story going to evolve without these two characters being able to speak? I can't really speak to that, but the way that the gameplay evolved in the short time that I spent with the game showed off what the developer is trying to do in terms of messing with different genres and finding unique ways to solve puzzles. It is at the end of the day a platformer, but there were sections that felt very familiar, and then there were some that you were this big giant ball with hands reaching out, and each one of us needed to reach out with the hands. There was also a section that you've probably seen in the trailer where you're manipulating gravity, where one character is stuck on the ceiling and one character is stuck on the ground, and you have to manipulate gravity to progress. Very fun, very inventive, and I think it really ratchets up the difficulty as you learn those mechanics, and I appreciated the way that they didn't keep things very basic. They slowly evolved what you were doing once you got a basic understanding of those mechanics. Just so impressed by Out of Words. That stop motion animation in and of itself, super appealing, but then a co-op platformer that really only Hazelight is the other developer trying to work in this sandbox of making everything be on a single screen. I really appreciate that. I love those games. Getting to share those experiences with a friend, a family member, a partner is something special. So I'm glad that Out of Words exists. And I really have to applaud the ambition of the game. It blew me away. It feels like every Summer Game Fest, there is a Souls-like that captured the attention of tons of people at the show. And I think Wuchang Fallen Feathers is the game that really a ton of people were obsessed with. I was obsessed as well. I think last year Black Myth Wukong blew me away, and it ended up being my favorite game of the year. And I'm not afraid to say that Wuchang Fallen Feathers did the same for me. I really love the tight gameplay that they had brought to the table. I will say that there was no developer kind of walking me through the mechanics, so I was kind of learning as I went. They gave us a lot of freedom. They said, here is the demo. You can go to the right, to the left. You can kind of find your own path, find different bosses to fight. I saw a lot of different people fighting bosses that I never even saw because I took different paths from them. But at its core, it is a fast and furious Souls-like, but there are unique builds you can go with. You can have different weapons. It's all about building up these charges with your feathers, and then you spend those charges for unique kind of combo extenders or abilities or skills or magic. It depends on how you want to use the feathers and how you've been built out, but you can be combining your light and your heavy attacks and then mix in this really flashy attack that might stun an enemy or might parry their attack or reflect their attack. And then as you're dodging their attacks, you're generating more of those feather charges. So it is mixing and matching. Do you want to be more offensive? Do you want to be defensive? How do you want to get those feathers going? And then when do you want to use them? I found it super flashy to see on screen, but also so satisfying to be able to mix and match what I was doing from a combat perspective and then choosing what skills to use, trying out different weapons. It is the Souls-like that I think a lot of people are going to be obsessed with. It's not too far off. It releases in July. I think you're going to be seeing a ton of people playing this on streams and talking about this, coming up with different builds and strategies for bosses. Again, I didn't have a ton of guidance, so specific mechanics and abilities and things that were available to me, I was just learning on the fly, just kind of like you would. But it has all of the core fundamentals. You rest at your quote-unquote bonfires. You can find alternate paths. You unlock shortcuts. There are enemies hidden in different places, new weapons to collect. new gear to outfit your character that has different stats. But the combat is super flashy. It's significantly faster paced and deliberate than what you might see in a Dark Souls or From Software game. It has a lot more in common with Black Myth Wukong. I found myself doing a lot more dodging than I did blocking or parrying, although that is still a totally viable option for people. I saw plenty of players that were fighting bosses and they were going for an approach that was completely different from what I was going for. But I found the dodge super satisfying, and those perfect dodges, you get way more iframes, you generate more feather power, and then you can chain into your skills. It's so satisfying. It looks so beautiful. I think the art style and the boss design and enemy design is exactly what you want from this type of game. And it feels really tight. I know that there are a lot of Souls-likes out there, and it's really hard for them to stand out. But Wuchang Fallen Feathers, it just feels like that type of game that is going to come around. People are going to be obsessed with it. People are going to find it super fun to play. It's a strong contender for being one of my favorite games of this year, even though I only played about an hour and a half of it. But I'm willing to stake that claim, because Black Myth Wukong, I played that last year. I was sort of obsessed with it after I played it, and it ended up being my favorite game of last year. And I feel the same way about Wuchang Fallen Feathers. Even though there are some great games that have already released in 2025, I think this is going to be up there. If you're a Souls-like fan, if you've been looking for the next Black Myth Wukong or that kind of fast-paced Stellar Blade-esque game, I think that Wuchang Fallen Feathers has a really strong case for being your next obsession, and I had a tremendously fun time playing it. Wuchang Fallen Feathers is not that far off, and I cannot wait to play the finished game. Marvel Cosmic Invasion is the next game from Dotemu, who most people might know from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge beat 'em up. This is another beat 'em up in the kind of Dotemu lineage, but I think it's got a little bit of the fighting game vibes in it. Obviously, you're going to be instantly drawn in with the Marvel property connection. You can play as quite a few different characters from throughout the Marvel Comics universe. I love Nova, so seeing a video game where you get to play as Nova is very exciting, but also you get some of your favorites like Hulk and Wolverine and Spider-Man, Venom, so you can mix and match. I was able to play it with another person, so each of us was able to have 2 characters that we could switch between freely, so for a total of 4, each of us having access to 2 different characters. And so it's got the basic beat 'em up idea of you're just punching bad guys, you're punching Marvel themed baddies, but since you have a second character at the ready, it's kind of like tagging them in a fighting game. So you can use them to come in at any point and transfer in and continue your combo, or you can also have them come through and do a specific type of attack, like a ranged attack, a launcher, and then string in this crazy set of combos. So you might be wailing on an enemy as Spider-Man, and then you might decide to throw in Venom. He launches them in the air. Venom continues the combo, he's punching him, and then Spider-Man comes in and does a ranged attack to keep that whole string going. It is some crazy, kinetic, chaotic action, and I think Dotemu has found a rhythm, especially if you had the full complement of players on the screen. You're just going to have so many things going on, it's going to be hard to keep track. But I had such a blast playing this game. There are flying characters, there are ground-based characters, so you can mix and match them based on what enemy types are coming your way, and just stringing together those combos, switching in and out your partners, having them use those different attacks. And then you've got these ultimate attacks that you can unleash when your bar is full. You can even use the ultimate attacks of your character and your tag character, so to speak, and just decimate everything on the screen. I had so much fun playing this game. I think Dotemu really does beat 'em ups so well, but being able to use that Marvel Comics IP, have all these fun characters, which they still haven't even announced like a full roster. There are tons more characters, I believe, waiting in the wings to be revealed, but what is available is a mixture of some of your favorites and some more obscure choices as well. It tickled that itch in a way that I didn't expect. I thought we were just in for a beat 'em up that Dotemu does so well, but that ability to mix and match and bring in those characters and have them do these assists and continue to string on your combos, I think is what's going to give Marvel Cosmic Invasion its variety, its replayability, its excitement factor for playing with other people, being able to decide, okay, I want to have a flying character and a ground character, you want to do that, and we want to be able to have all of our bases covered. And then there are cool boss fights. We got to one of the levels, and at the end you face off against Taskmaster, and Taskmaster, you couldn't just, mash the buttons. You had to be deliberate. You had to wait for an opening. So there, I assume, are going to be variety in the boss encounters. You're not just wailing on them with your combos, but you have to think about what their moveset and their abilities are. So I think that's going to add a new wrinkle to combat. Didn't see a ton of the boss battles, but the ones we did see weren't just like straightforward, wait for your chance to attack, and that's it. You had to be a little more considered in what you do. But even just beating up the basic enemies was super fun, and I think Marvel Cosmic Invasion is going to be a really, really fun time to play with a couple of friends. Crisol Theater of Idols. This is a first-person shooter that is being published by Blumhouse Games. It has a little bit of survival horror in the Resident Evil, BioShock vibes, but I think the cool mechanic of Crisol is that your blood, your health, is your ammo. So the weapon you start off with is a little pistol, and every time that you need to add a little bit of ammo, you're actually draining your health. You're plugging your wrist into the pistol, and you're draining your health to then get ammo. So there's this push and pull mechanic of, okay, I've taken some damage, but I need ammo. What do I do? Now, there are health syringes around to replenish your health, but at the same time, you are trying to be very conscious of what you're doing in terms of engaging with the enemies, avoiding the enemies, knowing that you're going to be draining your health, both if you want to take them out or if you take damage from them. So that's a really interesting mechanic, and I think visually they represent it really cool. We also got a shotgun later in that had its own blood draining mechanic. I do think that the demo was a little generous in terms of giving you syringes, and so it didn't create as much tension, but I also think that for a demo, they just wanted to introduce this mechanic to you. The world of Crisol, I think, is really cool. It's got this mix of kind of contemporary and old school Spanish architecture. These statues have come to life. You don't really know what's going on. When I was talking to one of the developers, they said that they were really influenced by all kinds of different Spanish architecture and helped them design the world. It has a BioShocky look in terms of that first-person combat going through a uniquely designed world. There are no powers in the game. It is all based on that blood mechanic. So though you might hear BioShock and think, oh, what are my cool blood powers? What I saw, there were no blood powers, but I do think the combat mechanics of using your blood and being able to replenish your ammo using that health is really neat. And I think it will create a unique tension in the game, and it will make you have to think about when you do or don't want to engage. One of the enemies in the demo was this kind of big robot doll looking thing, a statue that had come to life, and you weren't supposed to engage with it. You were supposed to hide from it. So that was more of the Resident Evil style approach to combat, or non-combat. I will say you are hiding from it. You aren't really fighting it. So that's something that I think they'll need to work out in terms of how engaging it is to avoid enemies. But there were a few enemies that you could take on directly. One of them was this pair of dolls that if you shot them basically in the chest, they would break in half, and then there would actually be four of them. So like their torsos would be coming at you, and then their legs would be coming at you, and I thought that was really unique. Crisol Theater of the Idols, I think it lives and dies on that health mechanic, how much tension they can create with your inability or your ability to get that blood and keep your ammo going, and be considerate of what damage you take. But I was really impressed by what I played of Crisol Theater of Idols. I do want to give some honorable mentions to a few games that, though we didn't get to play, we did see, and they looked incredible. First up is Pragmata. Now, Pragmata surprised a lot of people just by its very existence. Most people weren't sure if Capcom's third-person shooter was actually a real game. And then at the Summer Game Fest showcase, they were finally able to show off a little bit of gameplay, show the game in action, and then we were able to play it at the Play Days media event. I would say one of the coolest things about Pragmata is how it uses a puzzle mechanic while you are moving around. Make sure to check out my write-up on GameRant.com if you want to see some examples of what that puzzle mechanic is. But essentially what you're doing is, as you are in front of an enemy, a robotic enemy, you are moving, strafing side to side with your left stick, and then meanwhile, Diana, the little girl on your back, is hacking that robot, and using the face buttons, you're kind of navigating this puzzle to unlock the ability to hack the robotic enemy and be able to attack them, make them vulnerable to damage. So while the left stick is doing kind of basic movements, the face buttons are navigating this puzzle. It's a little bit like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. It's fairly unique. I think it stands out in a sea of third-person shooters where you're just really trying to shoot enemies in their weak points. This adds a new wrinkle to that, and I think it is unique in that you're going to be doing something different. Whether or not that is going to carry on through a full experience is hard to say. The game certainly looks beautiful in the RE engine, and I think it will be one to look out for. I was really intrigued by what I played, but I wouldn't be able to give a fair judgment just because I played such a short portion of that game. Also from Capcom was Resident Evil Requiem. This was a hands-off demo. It had some fades to black, so you didn't really get a full sense of how the game plays. But I will say that based on what I saw, it looks like Requiem is going back to the survival horror elements from the previous Resident Evil games, the earlier games. There was no combat. It was all about sneaking around, using your wits, getting past this kind of big, bulbous monster with just like elongated limbs. It was quite terrifying, and not being able to engage it directly. Granted, I'm sure there will be combat. There are rumors about how combat will play out in Resident Evil Requiem, but this was a return to form in terms of making it seem scarier and avoiding enemies and not directly engaging with them. And then the coolest thing was at the end of the presentation, they showed that you could switch the perspective to third person or back to first person whenever you like. So you can play it fully in third person, fully in first person, or a little bit of both. So you're getting sort of the best of both worlds if you're a Resident Evil fan, and I think that is one of the coolest ways to go about it. And then finally, the presentation at Bandai Namco, we also got to see a little bit of Code Vein 2. Code Vein 2 is the anime Souls-like from Bandai Namco. I think it was kind of a sleeper hit for me. I really had a fun time with it, mixing and matching the different abilities and creating a build that fit into this Souls-like formula. Seems like Code Vein 2 is going bigger, shooting for that AAA approach, and I think that that's going to excite a lot of people, and I certainly was impressed by everything I saw, but I didn't see enough of the game, and I didn't get to play it to be able to pass judgment, and that's why it's in just an honorable mention. I'll admit that Summer Game Fest 2025 didn't have a ton of high-profile AAA games, but I still think that there was enough variety in terms of bigger games, indie games, games I had never even heard of that surprised me, that I feel like the 2025 event was once again a hit for me. I played some games that scratched these different itches, whether it was a side-scrolling platformer like Shinobi, beat 'em up like Marvel Cosmic Invasion, the next great entry in one of my favorite series in Directive 8020, or the next Souls-like obsession that I am just going to be thinking about and playing very soon in Wuchang Fallen Feathers. There was just a lot going on. I couldn't play everything. Again, there were some things that I saw like Onimusha and Resident Evil Requiem that I wasn't able to play that I still think have a lot of interesting things going on. I will say 2026 seems to be the target year for almost all of these games, so there weren't a ton of titles available to play that you could play imminently, but plenty of reasons to be excited for the year ahead in 2026. And I think what I was able to play left me with enough variety that I'm really eager to see how video games continue to impress me for the next 12 months. And then when Summer Game Fest 2026 comes around, I'm sure there'll be a whole new slate of games. I want to say thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. Summer Game Fest, it continues the legacy of E3, and I still find it super fun to go out to LA and play all these new games, talk to developers, prepare the content that we are going to be giving you at GameRant.com for the next 12 months. I hope you enjoy watching these. We'll do more of them. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.